It took me less than 6 months at my first job to learn what 4 years of undergrad couldn't teach me, and it's proved to be way more important than most of the technical stuff that I learned back in college. I don't care how many books you've read or how many languages you know or if you can balance a binary search tree, because no successful business is built solely on top of any of that technical expertise. It doesn't matter what industry it's in, whether it's computer science or as an engineer or even as a YouTuber, surviving and thriving for that matter is dependent on understanding what your customer wants and needs and delivering that experience. So this might sound intuitive because I'm telling it to you flat out, but looking back at college, I think I only ever had one class that kind of got into any of this stuff, and frankly, that's a little bit of a stretch. The root cause of this issue in a lot of cases is that college frankly struggles to replicate the scale and the real world challenges of going into industry through the use of projects, homeworks, and tests. College can do a great job of assessing your knowledge of concepts and also just your ability to work through technical problems. But unless you're taking business-oriented classes as part of your major, you're probably missing out on some basic knowledge around the fundamental pillars of the corporate world, which presumably is where college assumes it's sending most of its graduates. Now, some colleges try to get around this problem by having something like a junior design or a senior design course. In my case, that was 2 semesters during my junior year that I worked in a team of 5 or 6 people. But despite the fact that we spent the better part of a year working with a client designing an Android app for them, at the end of the day, the course was oriented around a curriculum and, most importantly in my mind back then, a grade. Instead of the focus feeling like it was really on connecting with our customers' wants and needs, it more so felt like a process of checking off boxes and just doing different assignments along the way with minimal supervision and feedback. Now, obviously this is just my singular perspective, and overall it really was not a bad experience. We got to build a real app instead of a toy project, which is something you don't do in most college courses, and we also got good experience of working in teams and kind of managing our own project. I just remember walking away from it feeling like we could have learned so much more. At this point though, I want to transition into talking about something a little bit different though, which is some of these misconceptions that are floating around and are relatively widespread about customer focus and why a lot of them are fundamentally flawed. I think the problem with the expression "the customer is always right" is when people take it a little bit too literally. Now, obviously it's important to put your customers first and to treat them well, but that doesn't mean they always know exactly what they want, especially in the context of complicated problems that have highly technical solutions. Sometimes what you might find is that customers know what end state they want or what their objective is, but they have a different view of how you should be achieving that goal than what is actually feasible or what the best way of actually doing that is. And that's why it's your job to be able to pull apart what the customer's ultimate desires are and what they actually want as their end state, and distinguish that from the way they're trying to tell you to get to it, because the reality is that isn't always the best way of doing it. Despite the fact that the origin of this expression is apparently a misquote from a movie from the 1980s, I really think this is a dangerous sentiment to be throwing around in a business context, because it's generally a really bad idea to spend a lot of time, money, and effort on building something when you don't know if anyone actually wants it. This concept applies to pretty much anything, so long as your intent is for people to be consuming it or buying it in the end. You need to understand what they want and what they're willing to trade for it in terms of money, time, or anything else. It also gets into this idea of meeting customers where they are. Even if you do produce a superior solution, you have to think about the ecosystems that customers are already in and how many hoops they'd have to jump through to switch over to your solution. Because just because you built it doesn't mean anyone's coming. One of the worst possible things you can do when you're trying to build up an audience is to have a high barrier to entry. You might have created something great, but if it's hard to figure out how to use it or how to get to it, then you're naturally going to lose people along the way. It's why websites have streamlined how you buy things to require less clicks so you can convert more potential buyers into actual customers. And on top of that, it's why in many cases it's so important to have things like how-to guides, tutorials, or just an intuitive design to make sure you're not losing people along the way. And even if people do eventually figure things out, or they push through the inconveniences of getting to the thing you've made, they've still had a negative experience along the way, which generally is not the best way to build up a loyal fan base. The reason why I decided to make a video about this is because it's a muscle I've been flexing more and more recently. As part of my job, I've realized how important it is to make sure customers are having a great experience and that we're building the right tools for them. And then on top of that, also just in building a community on YouTube. It's not something that has to be taught in a classroom, but it definitely is important. And the sooner you realize that and start exercising that, it's going to make a huge difference in whatever it is you're doing with your life. Anyways, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.